so those who are on the phone calling in will know who's speaking. Those who are calling into the meeting will be muted to eliminate background noise. And then if you do need to have a sidebar, it would be great if you could do that offline, outside. We will go around when we ask for comments to the members in the room first before we go to the telephone. Hopefully those of you who are participating on the phone have entered the meeting through the computer. This will enable us to recognize you and allow us to unmute you so that you may provide your comments. Or in the alternative, less preferred though, you can type in your comment in the chat area, and staff will be able to read it out for you. And I think all of the council members got that information previously via email. So again, all of the council members have an agenda in front of you. I think we should go very quickly around the room so that the members can introduce themselves. I will start. Tom Bushatsky, the Director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources and the Chair of the Council, and we'll go across the way here.
Jamie Kelly, representing Mojave County Water Authority.
State Representative Gail Griffin.
Hunter Moore, Governor's Office.
Representative Charlene Fernandez.
Philip Richards, APS.
Wade Noble, Yuma County Agriculture Water Coalition.
Richard Humphreys with Carollo. Ron Doba, Northern Arizona Municipal Water Users Association.
John Kamik, Southern Arizona Water Users Association.
Terry Sue Rossi, Arizona Water Company.
Steve Miller, Pinal County Supervisor.
Mark Smith, Yuma Irrigation District.
Maria Dadgar, Executive Director, Intertribal Council of Arizona.
Val Saha, Arizona Cattle Feeders.
Ted Maxwell, the Southern Arizona Leadership Council.
Cheryl Lombard, Valley Partnership.
Pat Graham, the Nature Conservancy.
Pam Muse, Land Department Designee for Lisa Atkins.
Ted Cook, Central Arizona Project.
Brett Fleck, AMWA Designee for Warren Tenney.
Chris Udall, Agribusiness Water Council of Arizona.
Craig Sullivan, County Supervisors Association.
Kevin Rogers, Arizona Cotton Growers.
Virginia O'Connell, Arizona Water Bank.
Stephanie Smallhouse, Arizona Farm Bureau.
Bruce Hallen, SRP, here for Dave Roberts.
Courtney Coolidge with the Arizona Chamber, here for Glenn Hammer.
Dave Dunaway for ADEQ.
Jay Whiten, Arizona Cattle Growers.
Carol Ward, Deputy Assistant Director, ADWR.
Okay, so we'll turn to council members on the phone, and folks came in late, sorry.
Tim Tom, Director of Tucson Water.
Senator Lisa Otondo, LD4.
Anyone else around the table that we missed? Okay, now turn to the phone and we'll have staff unmute you. Members on the phone, introduce themselves, please, at this point.
This is Kathy Sarah. Sarah Porter. I just got past the crash at 7th Street on the freeway, and I'm making my way in.
I think that's appropriate given your topic. Next.
David Brown, Eastern Arizona.
Kathy Ferris.
So hopefully we've had a chance for everyone to introduce themselves. Again, if somebody hasn't and you do speak, when you introduce yourselves as part of that, as part of your commenting, then we'll know that you're with us as well. So moving on to the agenda, we have a very long and robust agenda today. And If we do have to adjust this a little bit, if we start running out of time, I'll let you know. But we are going to proceed right now with the agenda as it is laid out. And the first item are committee updates. And the first update is for the Desalination Committee. And I think Philip is going to give us that update.
Yeah. So Philip Richards with APS, the chair of the Desal Committee. And we've had a couple good, well-attended committee meetings since the last council meeting. And so I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedule to attend these meetings and to work on them. We started off with a good catch-up to bring everybody up to speed. It had been a couple of years since we had met, so Zach did a nice job. Zach with ADWR did a nice job helping us get caught up to speed. We talked about 7 different areas in the state that may be a good opportunity for projects for Arizona. We have narrowed that down to a couple different areas and then one substantial issue that we're going to focus on moving forward. We also talked a little bit about the project timeline. As I discuss these projects, you'll see that they have significantly different project timelines, so we'll need to revise that as we move forward with each of these also. First of all, we discussed the opportunity of a potential project in the West Salt River Valley, and it has some issues for sure, some things that we need to overcome, but really any project like this is going to have significant issues, things we need to talk about, discuss, put on the table, and see if it's possible to move forward with a project there. One of them is the regulatory uncertainty that comes with that area. And so we're going to put together a subcommittee to take a look at some of the regulatory issues with that area, have them kind of list out what they are, and then report back to the larger committee. The other one is what do you do with the brine? All of the areas except for maybe one in the state has this problem. And so we had an update from ADEQ. They're trying to get primacy so that we won't have to go through ADEQ and the EPA in order to get a permit. They did a very nice job, and it looks like they're making some progress. So possibly in the next several months, year time frame, they may be able to move forward so that we would only have to get one permit, kind of streamlining the process in getting a brine disposal for deep well injection. There's obviously other brine disposal options out there, and we want to explore them all. One of the things that came up was El Paso is doing deep well injection, and they also have a plant that takes the brine and breaks it into its components and makes a marketable product out of most of the brine. I've asked the director of El Paso Water to present at the next DSAL meeting and give us an update on how that project's going. I know the plant's built. I know they were trying to commission it, and I don't really know much past that. So I think he'll have some good information for us, and then I think he'll also be happy to answer any questions that we may have. And I think that'll be valuable since they're kind of doing both in that area. So look forward to that at the next DSAL committee meeting. The second area that we talked about is the water in the mode that goes by the Yuma desal plant. We had the Bureau of Reclamation give an update of how we got to where we're at with the YDP plant, and then what the possibilities are moving forward. They had some costs. They had an estimate of about $762 per acre foot for maintenance, bring the plant up to where it can operate, and then operation costs. That's not cheap water by any means, but given today's climate, it may be in the ballpark. So we want to continue to look at this area. Chuck and with the Central Arizona Project and ADWR and hopefully the Bureau of Rec will get together and give us a cost for what it's costing Arizona not to run this plant. And so Chuck's leading that effort. He's agreed to report out at the next desal meeting, at least with an update, and so we're looking forward to that also. We know how much it costs to run the plant. Hopefully we'll figure out how much it's costing Arizona not to run the plant and see if there isn't some avenue to move forward with getting that plant up and running again in the near future. And then I want to thank ADWR for giving us an update on some of the regulatory hurdles. We know that there's many of them, but hopefully we can overcome those. That may be one of the biggest asks in the future. How does this group see us moving forward with some of the regulatory hurdles that we have with a plant, a new plant? And with that, I don't want to take any more time than I need to, but please, if you're interested, attend the next desal committee meeting. It's October 10th at 10 a.m. here at ADWR. Any questions? Are we taking questions at this time?
So we will, but I just want to remind folks that on DWR's webpage, there are links to when the committee meetings are. It holds for all the committees. You can get information about the committees there as well. So good time to remind. I do have one quick question before I turn to the members. And that is for the dollar per acre foot figure that you quoted. What capacity of the YDP is that for? 100% of the capacity, 50, 60, 70? Do you know that?
That's a good question. I'm looking at some of the other committee members. Let me get back to you on that.
And then in the committee, when you talked about YDP, did you talk about a path forward or at least tee up issues related to the Cienega in Mexico?
We know that that's going to be a hurdle, and we're going to have to explore that as we move forward. So that did come up. Wade brought that up, and we know that that will have to be assessed as we move forward. The nice thing is they did do a pilot. The pilot was considered successful, so we do think that there is a path forward.
My techie folks are working on that.
Or is it somebody trying to comment on what we're discussing?
So for members, any questions for Philip? Okay. Anyone on the phone? Members? Okay, before we move on, we have another member that has joined us.
Good morning. I'm sitting back in the back. I've just recently joined you all. Senator Victoria Steele from Tucson.
Thank you. Okay, then we will move on to the next agenda item, a committee report on the non-AMA Groundwater Committee. That is co-chaired by Representative Griffin and Jamie Kelly, and I think Representative Griffin is going to start with the presentation.
Okay. Our next meeting, the first meeting was in July, and our next meeting is on the 23rd of this month. We had more than 60 attendants and discussed goals and future topics. The goals are on the board. Be the baseline understanding of Arizona's groundwater non-managed areas, identify, develop voluntary alternatives to address groundwater issues by planning area while protecting individual property rights, to make recommendations to the full council for best management practices at the local level, and those also could be implemented at the state level as well. And further discussion and recommendations. This was not 100%. There was some further discussion on further discussion and recommendations of issues that may be brought forward. Some of the other issues for best management practices that we will be bringing forward at the next meeting on the 23rd will be develop incentives for voluntary measures to enhance water absorption, to enhance aquifer recharge, brush control and management to increase soil and water holding capacities via mechanical treatment, herbicide, biological, prescribed fire treatments, and other things like that, and develop incentives for enhancing rainwater harvesting to optimize the design and management of rainwater storage, surface water channeling, and we did discuss the study on state trust lands for that the department is doing with the state land department, so that we can create additional recharge. Keeping in mind that 80% of the population lives in active management areas, the rest of us live in non-active management areas, and we like local control.
Thanks, Representative Griffin. Anything to add from Jamie Kelly?
Yes, Director Bieshatsky. If we could go back to the goals, please. As my co-chair pointed out or mentioned, there was a lot of discussion and recommendation on what issues should be brought forward. I actually think it would have been very beneficial if the first non-AMA Groundwater Committee had been held after the long-term augmentation report was issued. I think the long-term augmentation report identifies groundwater issues that perhaps should be taken up and considered by the non-AMA. There's several places in that report that references a need for evaluation and perhaps some type of regulation for groundwater to effectively manage and use Arizona's water. In the non-AMA Groundwater Committee is a subcommittee of this council. I was wondering if the council would like to provide specific direction to the committee as to certain issues to consider. Ms. Ferris sent an email to the AMA, can we just call it groundwater? To the Groundwater Committee expressing concerns that the goals were not broad enough. I think Goal D is broad enough for everything, but perhaps it's too broad and should be narrowed down. And I would put it out to the council if they have any suggestions for the Groundwater Committee moving forward.
So before we put it out to the council, I'd ask my staff who were at the meeting and taking some notes to give me a list for some of the other issues I think that you're talking about. And some of them were metering, monitoring, and reporting requirements, consideration of adequate water supply rules outside of AMAs, options to address fracking, water availability, water quality, and aquifer contamination issues, well spacing requirements, again, I think outside of active management areas, and then discussion of agricultural production in areas involved in the adjudication. And so I just throw those out there. There are probably some others. So do council members have other issues? Do they think that some, all, or none of these issues are items that the committee should continue to address in terms of giving more specificity to Committee Objective D? And I'd like to have a discussion about that among members. Ron?
Thank you, Chairman Bieshatsky. Ron Doba from NAMWA, and I was able to attend the first non-AMA groundwater meeting. I have a couple of comments. First of all of the issues that you just identified for sure are things that this committee can look at, including some of the other needs that we have outside of AMAs, like acquiring more data on groundwater for our modeling purposes. One of the watershed groups that I'm involved with recently completed a ecosystem services assessment, a water-related ecosystem services assessment that involved a number of surveys from major water providers and stakeholders in the northern part of the state. And the number one issue that came up as far as their priorities when they looked at water was the groundwater system. And they expressed a desire for continued assessment of groundwater flows and the need for more data for our models to make them more accurate. On the other hand, the other issue I'd like to address, and I'd like to know if any of the other members that we have here at the table also view it the same way, and that's when I look at the goals that we have, I keep looking at that voluntary alternatives up there. And I brought this up at the committee. I think as a result, item number D was added on there, further discussion and recommendations of issues that may be brought forward. However, I still don't know if it's clear enough, and I would think that we don't want to restrict that committee to just looking at voluntary alternatives, because I don't know if that's going to resolve our issues. There's nothing wrong with voluntary alternatives, especially if they have incentives associated with them. But I'm just not sure if we want to restrict the committee to looking at voluntary alternatives.
Any other members? Representative Griffin?
Yes, I just want to make a mention to actually Arizona's Constitution, Article 2, Section 2 of the state constitution. It spells the purpose of government is to protect and maintain individual rights. So I want that to be foremost and up front. I'll have copies of that at our next meeting.
Thank you. Anyone else want to weigh in? Yeah. Senator Otondo first. And then
thank you. I know there's a few people at the table who also know of this, but there is a water vetting group of legislators and stakeholders that met just this week. And there are many ideas on the table from legislators and ideas that need to be vetted. And many of them are concerning groundwater. So I just wanted to make sure that we also listen to potential ideas of both Democrats and Republicans that are coming out of the legislature.
Thank you. Bass was next, I think.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that, before we attack or knock voluntary alternatives, I'd like an example of where we, in the past, have even pursued any of these and where they might have failed. I think we're jumping the gun a little bit where we just try to jump over those and say, we don't know if that'll work. We've never tried none. So I just caution that.
And I don't think that we're trying to predispose any outcome at this point, Tom. I think this is a discussion of issues to be discussed at the committee, is my understanding of what's been asked for. David, or were you next? No? Yeah, go ahead.
Director, thank you for this opportunity. DEQ would like to encourage and support Goal D to make sure that all ideas are heard. Much as precipitation that falls out of state ultimately impacts our in-state activities, and activities outside of AMAs can ultimately impact AMAs. DEQ just wants to recognize that good problem solving is impeded if we limit the scope of further discussion. Director, you mentioned some things that are near and dear to DEQ's heart about aquifer contamination. We have similar projects working on that right now to identify and address areas of high nitrate, for instance. So we would just like to throw support behind that, as well as encourage Goal D to be as broad.
And I would ask you, David, if we get into a discussion in the committee, DEQ be willing to be a resource for us and do some presentations and share your information and what you're working on?
Yes, absolutely. I have Director Cabrera's full backing to say, yes, we're willing to support.
Thanks. Next down the line, Bruce.
Thanks, Director Bishotsky. This is Bruce Allen for the Salt River Project. And from SRP's perspective, we've been monitoring, metering water throughout the state and within our watershed for close to 100 years, and we continue to do that to learn more, gain more knowledge. And I can tell you that we continue to utilize new technologies, et cetera, to get a better understanding of the water situation. And without good metering, it's difficult to develop good management plans without an understanding of what you're measuring. And so from our perspective, we would be supportive of the department and others continuing the programs to gather more data and gather a better understanding on the water situation in the non-AMA areas.
Senator Otondo.
Thank you, Director. I would also like to say that communities, areas that would be supportive, we should also be looking at those areas that would support more INAs, irrigation non-expansion areas. So I think that that's also something that can't be taken off of the table for communities that may want it.
Representative Fernandez.
Thank you, Director. I just want to remind everyone that the groundwater rights are not property rights. And I think by limiting what the committee is doing right now too much is that we could be setting it up to fail.
Anyone else? I see a couple hands at the end, but I can't see that far. Brett?
Brett Fleck for AMWA, representing Warren Tenney today. Warren wanted me to express this. Council members, we think it's really important to consider all options, both voluntary and otherwise, when we try to address some of these really complicated issues. Limiting ourselves from the outset is probably not something that we want to do. And we think it's really important, as Representative Griffin said, to listen to local stakeholders and to hear what they have to say. And some of the options might include voluntary solutions and some might include new regulations. So we just think it's important to hear all options, particularly those from local stakeholders.
Thank you. Craig Sullivan, did I see your hand raised?
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you, Tom. So Craig Sullivan, County Supervisors Association, and I wasn't able to attend the groundwater meeting, so my apologies if I'm a little behind on some of that. But I did want to make a couple of comments. The counties have not supported one-size-fits-all water policies, and we've not supported statewide mandates. What we have supported is the planning area process. Focusing on at-risk basins and trying to develop the local information that's necessary to empower the local community to consider what their future may look like. And so my hope is that embedded in these goals is a process through which we'll be able to hear reports from the Department of Water Resources on how those planning area processes are proceeding, the information that's available, and to the extent that there are gaps in information, we would like to talk about what the menu of possible items could be to address that. And I know that can be difficult, but there are technological solutions and incentive-based solutions and other types of things to make sure that we have good information in these areas that are risk. And specifically, I'm talking to my experience in Mojave and La Paz counties, where I've been out in those community meetings and I've seen the local concerns that exist. So I do hope that embedded in that is that conversation, Director, and I would like to get your sense on whether that's what your vision is under Goal A and then possibly under Goal D.
So I'll say this. I think that is one piece of what could be discussed, and certainly DWR would be happy to provide the information you asked about. But again, I'm not sure. I don't have a vision for an outcome right now, but I think using this council and the committee through this council, I guess, to address these issues is really important. And some of it may go nowhere, usually a very small percentage of issues like this get traction and build consensus support. But I think at the formative stages that we're at, I think it would be good to broaden the scope and again, in the context of item D, help define understand better what item D really means. So anyone else? Bass again?
Well, I've heard for, I don't know, maybe the third time now in some of these meetings that groundwater is not a property right. It may be semantics, but there are vested rights in groundwater. They're not just floating little things out there that you can do with what you want anytime you want. They are vested rights.
Have a comment on the phone? Just a second. We got someone at the table still. Hunter?
Thank you, Director and members. From the Governor's Office perspective, I think, having discussed this with Director Bushatsky and understanding the diverse nature of interests over this, it's important to have the discussion. Without the discussion, we don't get to any relevant conclusions. We don't inform policymakers. We don't inform local decisions. And we potentially affect rights and interests without action, if action is necessary. So I think a healthy discussion is important. The Governor and our office are very interested in making sure that all the right people are at the table, the experts, et cetera, to give us good feedback and some guidance on some of the key issues that do face the state now and will likely face the state in the future. I'm not trying to pick winners and losers here, but there's obviously in the room there's a tension over this issue. It does need to be discussed, and we'd appreciate it if some of the issues that have been referenced so far would be discussed at length.
Anyone else around the table before we move to the telephone? Stephanie?
Well, I would echo Craig and Bass's comments with one slight clarification or additive in terms of the voluntary measures. There's just, there are lots of voluntary measures that are happening right now and that are successful. They're just not organized with the state telling people that they, have to do voluntary measures, however you want to reference that. And I hope to discuss that hopefully in the next committee meeting, all of the measures that are taking place. So I know we're referred to as the Wild West all the time, but really it's not so much. The other thing I wanted to bring up is, I can see from the size of this group and the different interests, it would be very difficult to limit the discussion, and it's harder to defend your position if everything's not discussed. But on the other hand, I think that if we're going to open up the discussion and have a significant discussion in that committee about mandatory actions maybe that have been done other places in the state, then there needs to be a significant discussion about infrastructure, because those mandatory actions were coupled with alternative water sources. And most of the areas around the state don't have alternative water sources. They don't have a CAP canal to bring in surface flow. Groundwater is what they have. And so if we're going to spend a lot of time talking about potential regulatory measures, then there needs to be a significant amount of time talking about where those folks are going to get all the water that they need if they're going to be regulated with what they're using now.
So thanks, Stephanie. And I think the importance of the ongoing practices, I think, is shown in item C on this list. Specifically is the discussion of best management practices. And I definitely agree with you. If we're going to get to if there's going to be any traction on mandatory activities outside the active management areas, we have to get to what is the likelihood those mandatory activities are going to create the outcome that some hope they create, not unintended consequences, not put people out of business. And I think your comments about the linkage between the infrastructure inside the AMAs, CAP being one, to the success of those regulatory programs there is well taken and needs to be part of the discussion. So then I think we have Hunter again.
Thank you, Director. You kind of stole my thunder, so I'm not going to make my comment as long as I was going to. But to Stephanie's point, having gone to see different parts of the state and actually being on Stephanie's ranch and seeing some of the things that they've done, some of the best practices they've achieved, I think it's really important that other people throughout the state have an opportunity to see and hear some of the good things that are going on, because I think we do fail to recognize some of the successes that have happened because of voluntary action. those should be demonstrated. Those should be given their opportunity in the sun, so to speak. So appreciate the comment, understand your perspective, Tiffany, and actually agree with it.
Anything else from members around the table before we turn to the telephone? Representative Griffin.
I have one last comment, and what was brought up was the adjudication, and those issues are not resolved, and we want to make sure are we providing information to people that are being sued, and are we helping to work against their best interests?
And I'll respond, Representative Griffin, that we do have an agenda item here today on adjudication reform update that the Kyle Center is working on, and perhaps following on to that, we can have a conversation if there's more this council wants to dive into on the adjudication, if that works for you. Thank you. Anyone on the phone? Members on the phone? I know somebody was about to speak before I cut them off.
I had a comment from Kathy Ferris here. She says that she supports the discussion of the issues that the director noted. Kathy agrees with others that non-voluntary alternatives must be considered. This is the Governor's Council and the Governor and the state. We do the Governor and the state a great disservice if we fail to explore all possible measures.
Okay, anyone else, members on the phone? So hearing none, it seems to me that with some concerns raised, that the sense of the council is to refer back, so to speak, some of these issues to the committee for their potential discussion. We'll have staff who have been taking notes get out a report to the two committee chairs, and you all can proceed with this discussion, I guess, at the next committee meeting. So I thank you all, and we will move on then to the post-2025 AMA committee report. And Tim Tomyer is going to give you that report for us. So take it away, Tim.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Warren Tenney, the chair of this committee, was not able to be here today as his co-chair. I've been given the privilege of giving you an update on a committee that is just about to launch. We've come up with an objective of identifying water management challenges and opportunities facing the AMAs and generate objectives and strategic solutions for 2025 and beyond. The foundation of that is also looking at some of what came up earlier, is what are some of the successes we've had leading up to this point, and the first 45 years of the code, how that will inform life after 2025. Basic approach: identify these successes and challenges, and then propose solutions to address the new challenges or remaining challenges that we haven't conquered through the current time frame. 4 key principles are being proposed. One is that continuing to recognize that sound water management is critical, and we feel that the AMA process has been key to that to date in those areas. An open and honest discussion and deliberate rather than posture, making sure that all issues, perspectives are brought to the table and fully discussed so that we can really have a strong position moving forward. Having data inform and using the data to inform the issues and define them, and then respect the differences between the AMAs. The AMA process is not, at this point, a one-size-fits-all approach. There are already some differences in the goals of the different AMAs, differences in how those AMAs have come to approach those goals, and we anticipate that might even continue into the future, so recognizing the differences between the different areas. Mr. Tenney and myself are the co-chairs. We are actively seeking individuals to serve on the committee. We are asking that you make a commitment, and we're anticipating this to be a deep dive and an intensive process. There's a lot that the future could hold, and we really want to make sure that we get into it and set a good foundation moving forward. The first meeting, October 10th, 2 p.m. right here. Thank you.
Thanks. So before I ask for questions from members, I want to ask a question, and it might be putting on you on the spot a little bit, and given that we haven't even met with the committee yet, I'll ask the following, and for context, we just heard quite a bit about discussions in the Groundwater Committee about potential regulations. I am assuming that your committee is not going to address the potential for new active management areas outside the ones that are already existing, and any of that discussion would be in the Groundwater Committee. Is that your intention?
I believe that would be the correct place for that discussion, and if and when there was a need for this committee to address that, we would.
And so I bring that up in part so that folks who want to make sure their interests are being served might not necessarily, if one of their issues is that issue about AMA expansion, they don't necessarily need to attend all of your meetings because it's not going to happen there.
That's correct.
Okay, so having said that, questions from members of the council around the table? It's nice when you haven't met yet, so there's no controversy left yet. Anyone on the phone? Hearing none, we will move on then to the next item, and that is a report from the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee, and the chairman, Wade Noble, will be giving that report.
Director, may we go ahead and combine 2D and number 3?
Yes, you may.
Wade Noble, Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee Chair. The old adage, the proof is in the pudding. We're a little bit different situation than the other committees for this council. We have completed our report. Carollo did it. Mr. Richard Humphreys, engineer, is here today to give you a synopsis of the report. We will tell you now that the report is available on the Department of Water Resources website. You kind of have to drill down through, get into the council, get into the committees, get into the documents for the committees, but it is there, and we hope you've had an opportunity to look at it. So, Richard, take it away.
Thank you, Wade, and good morning. I'm here to present the results of the project we worked on collaboratively with the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee and the other team members that we had, including Montgomery & Associates and Westland Resources, who have all provided very valuable input into this process. As far as the outcomes of the project, they're grouped into these different categories here, and we will touch on each one of them as a part of the presentation. We'll talk a little bit about the water augmentation planning process and the options that we looked at and identified. And those various options fit into the following categories: water augmentation options, best practices that improve water efficiency, practices between willing parties, water augmentation concepts that require further development, and we also identified some impediments to water augmentation that should be considered. Arizona is divided into these water planning areas, and our mission as a part of this project was to look at each one of them to identify what types of augmentation would be appropriate for each of those different planning areas, also with the hope that we would identify some options that would be possibilities for the rural planning areas. And to summarize the options that we did identify, we grouped them according to their utility and purpose. First of all, the water augmentation options would be ocean desalination, Brackish groundwater desalination, groundwater transfers from the Harquahala and Butler basins, irrigation non-expansion areas, and we'll touch on each of these later in the presentation. Then we identified a group of 4 practices that improve water use efficiency, and those are agricultural water conservation, enhancing aquifer storage, reclaimed water utilization, and municipal water conservation. Projects and practices between willing parties that improve water management and help us to be more efficient or more effective in the water that we have may include water supply transfers for CAP and Colorado River water supply users when arrangements can be identified that both parties are open to. Modify operation of the Roosevelt Dam to use a flood control space for storage to be able to use that water at a different time and place that is beneficial to users. There's also a potential for an SRP to CAP interconnect facility that provides flexibility in moving water around that would benefit water users. And water augmentation concepts requiring further development, those fit in the category of weather modification, phreatophyte management, and watershed management. Those areas where we identified impediments to water augmentation that need continued and ongoing support to resolve would be Little Colorado River and Gila River water rights adjudications, and as a subpart of that, unresolved Indian water rights claims, and then groundwater management planning. So to address the water augmentation options, the image on the upper right is a construction project for an ocean desalination project. All ocean desalination type projects will be done under the context of Minute 323, which is an extension of cooperative measures and adoption of a binational water scarcity contingency plan for the Colorado River Basin. The next category is brackish groundwater desalination. The image shows a reverse osmosis treatment facility. And there are brackish groundwater supplies in Arizona that have not yet been developed for use, and the primary impediments for that are the cost of managing the brine that comes with the desalination process. And although this kind of a water augmentation may be expensive today, or at least more expensive than some of the water options available to us, with changes in technology in the future and a different price point, this may be an option that would be beneficial for water users in Arizona. And then finally, there is water that can be transferred from the Harquahala irrigation on expansion area to the AMAs, and that is an option that is available for water users in Arizona to consider. For options that improve water use efficiency, beginning with agricultural water conservation, Arizona is a leader in agricultural water conservation, and there are many things that growers have done in the past and will continue to do to improve water utilization, to the extent that those water conservation measures can be implemented in an economically viable way. There's additional steps that can be taken. Enhancing aquifer storage is another area that is done today in a number of areas of the state, and there are opportunities to increase the amount of aquifer storage that takes place so we have the water and can manage it to our best benefits. Municipal water conservation also is another area where Arizona provides leadership and has taken many steps over the past 2 or 3 decades to reduce water use, and there are opportunities to continue doing that. Water conservation of this nature doesn't produce a new water supply, but it does allow us to obtain additional benefits for the water supplies that we have. And then reclaimed water utilization, again, is an area where Arizona is providing leadership. And there are many areas where we are able to take reclaimed water and use it beneficially again. And we can continue that process as well to use reclaimed water as an important water source. On projects between willing parties, water supply transfers for the CAP and Colorado River water users, those to the extent that they benefit both parties of an agreement can be done, and we can use the CAP canal potentially to move some of that water where needed. The Roosevelt Dam has a lot of flood storage space that can be used, and if the SRP is able to modify their operating procedures when there are increased storm runoffs in the springtime that are stored in the reservoir, if we use a part of that emergency storage space to hold the water a little bit longer, then it can be used beneficially at a different time. And then the SRP to CAP interconnect facility has not been designed yet, but the concept here is to be able to move water from the SRP system to the CAP system, and by doing that, provide some flexibility to also use water that are not for users that are not on project. And so this is a potential benefit for the state of Arizona. Those water augmentation ideas that need additional development before they can be fully used or considered to be a water source would be the weather modification, which has been done successfully, but there are yet remaining questions and issues that would need to be resolved before that became a firm water supply. Phreatophyte management is another idea where we could manage phreatophytes, particularly the non-native species, to be able to use the water that those plants are using through evapotranspiration currently to be able to augment our water supplies. And finally, forest management is an important practice that we have been doing and should continue to do effectively so that the water supplies we have from our watersheds remain effective and viable. The impediments to water augmentation that the committee wanted to bring forward and highlight as issues that are being addressed at some level but need to continue to be addressed are the Little Colorado and Gila River stream adjudications. And this is important because once the adjudication process finishes, and to the extent that it does, it allows investment in water infrastructure to be able to use water supplies effectively. And resolving the Indian water rights issues is a part of that and also provides the same benefit that once resolved, the claims are resolved, then that allows investment in water resources that are identified. Statewide groundwater management planning is another area that can provide opportunities. Solutions in rural areas need to be unique to those areas. And there are groundwater supplies and resources in some parts of Arizona that have not been quantified, and they need to be quantified in order to be able to manage them effectively and find ways to use those water resources. So the outcomes of this study are, first and foremost, water augmentation implementation is up to the various water users in those areas to identify and to develop in the various planning areas. The outcomes of this committee are suggestions and ideas that various planners can take and use. They are not requirements or necessarily specific recommendations. As a part of this project, we didn't come up with a new bucket of water to go out and develop and exploit. The ones we've identified are ones that are already well known. However, the value of water is relative in time. There was a time when the SRP projects and the CAP projects were viewed as pie in the sky ideas. However, they have come to fruition and are an essential part of our water management here in Arizona today. So who knows but what there aren't some additional ideas discussed here that could come to fruition at some future time. The water supplies do need to be developed and paid for by those who would use the water supply. As a part of the committee, we didn't look to the federal government or some other source to provide funding for new water augmentation ideas. And we acknowledge that although the impediments to water augmentation that we are faced with today here in Arizona are time-consuming and difficult to resolve, we do believe that as they are resolved, we will be able to make investments that we're not able to make today in our water supply future. I'd like to acknowledge the many people that helped us on this project. The committee members listed here provided guidance and support, insights and ideas and feedback as we work to develop the outcomes and recommendations for this project, and I want to recognize each and every one of them. I also want to recognize the Arizona Department of Water Resources, who is the contracting agency, and they provided support, insights, ideas, and review that were absolutely essential for completing this project. And with that, are there any discussion items that you want to bring forward?
Questions from members for Richard? Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Richard, thank you for that report. And I had an opportunity to read it after it came out, recognizing it's a completed report. I do have a lot of questions and comments, and I don't want to take up this committee's time with them this morning, so maybe I'll just, being as you're sitting right next to me, I'll just hand them over to you, and maybe you can get back to me with them. I would like...
So, Ron, could you actually make sure that the chair of the committee, Wade, is kept in that loop?
I will do that.
Because we may need to report that out to all the committee members and then again back to the council at a future meeting.
Right. I will. I will ask one question with regards to when we identify the planning areas and the applicable water augmentation categories. On page 9 of the report, listing the planning areas, every one of them has BMPs identified on there as an applicable water augmentation category other than the lower Gila. Is there a reason for that? Is there? And it is.
The guy from Yuma wants to weigh in.
Okay. I didn't hear an answer, but
yeah,
we'll leave it at that.
I'd have to look at that to answer it and get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone on the phone? Oh, I see one down at the end. Brett?
Brett Fleck again, representing AMWA here for Warren Tenney. In Warren's absence, he had asked me to make a few comments on his behalf to the council. Warren would like to express his appreciation for the opportunity to participate on the committee, the hard work of his colleagues and Carollo, and the chair's objective of taking a comprehensive look at augmentation options across the entire state. With only 3 very complicated, costly augmentation options highlighted, some might be tempted to be disappointed in the outcome of the report. Warren disagrees with this sentiment. He thinks the study is a success in that it shows us that we shouldn't hope for or fall back on some new CAP scale canal or Roosevelt Dam scale project to avoid making the hard decisions and necessary investments that we have to make today. And recognizing that any of these new supplies that we're talking about, such as desalination, may be needed to offset cuts to our existing Colorado River allocations, let alone be a new supply in and of themselves. This report shows us how important it is that we be more efficient and flexible with the water that we already have. So, thank you for your time.
Thanks. Okay, we'll close. Wade, any more comments or next steps you want to share with us?
Certainly. We appreciate the comments. We anticipated them. That's why we have scheduled the next meeting of the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee for January 8th, because we expect this to be ongoing with not only the responses that we're hearing today, but probably new things that will come up. We don't consider this report to be the end-all, be-all for long-term water augmentation. There will be things that come up, refinements of what's in the report, and so we look to go forward on this with developing different ideas as they come and responding to comments. If necessary, we'll find some way to include them.
And you'll be accepting comments on the published report through your committee process, correct, from members of the council and anyone else that would like to weigh in?
Certainly, we would hope that they would submit them as soon as possible so that we can get them onto the agenda for the January 8th meeting. They can certainly give them to any member of the committee. They can give them to Cynthia. They can give them to me. Probably shouldn't send them to Richard.
All right, thank you. Okay, we will move on then in our agenda, and we have a presentation on the adjudication reform update being worked on by the Kyle Center by Sarah Porter.
Well, good morning. Nice to be here to talk about what I know you all think is the most interesting topic in water management in Arizona. I hope that by the end of this 20-minute presentation, you take away two big messages. And the first message is that Arizona has turned a corner in the adjudications. We are at a point where we can finally actually get some claims resolved, and that's an important moment for us. We're at a very important moment. And the second one is we need to keep in mind the little guys and little gals who are really impacted by the adjudication. And when we think about the adjudication, I think that we have a responsibility as people who really pay attention to complex water subjects to focus on those people, the little vulnerable people. We'll get into that more. So today what I'd like to do very quickly is remind us of what the adjudications are all about, talk about why they've taken so long. We'll do a very shallow dive into the subject of subflow, talk about why the adjudications matter and what the Kyle Center is trying to do about it. Let me also start by saying that before the Kyle Center was formed, Morrison Institute at ASU, which is the Kyle Center is part of, did a stakeholder process where water experts from around the state, many of the people here in this room, participated and identified water policy areas where a water policy think tank based at Morrison Institute could make a difference. The adjudications were one of the policy topics that rose to the top. And so it was my great pleasure when I first got to the Kyle Center almost 5 years ago to get to suddenly learn about an area of law that I had always avoided very actively. But let's start out by saying that surface water rights are very special. They're special in the West because we have the doctrine of prior appropriation, which means that a senior user, the person who first comes and diverts water from a stream and makes investments in using that water, that person has a senior right to later comers. And we need a system like this because there isn't all the water in the world. There's a limited amount of water, so we need some orderly way of making sure that people can protect their investments. And so what we need to attach to surface water rights are a priority date, so we know who's senior and who's junior. We need to know the quantity. We need to know the point of diversion and other information. But these rights are very special because of that, and the prior appropriation scheme or doctrine sort of assumes that there's some all-knowing person or agency that is busily ordering the rights and keeping track of them from most senior to most junior so that someday when there's a shortage, we know who gets the water. That's really what the adjudication is about. It's about putting the water rights holders in line from most senior to most junior and quantifying how much water they have. Now, it took Arizona quite a while to get to the point of having an adjudication. We have two big adjudications ongoing, as you all probably know. The biggest one is in the Gila River watershed, which covers the bottom half of Arizona and more. And it was launched in 1974 before we even had a Department of Water Resources. There are 40,000 parties in this adjudication and about 80,000 claims in the adjudication, 85,000 claims. The other adjudication is the Little Colorado River watershed. It is a smaller litigation in terms of the number of claims and parties, about 6,000 parties and about 14,000 claims. In the Gila River adjudication, 92% of the claimants are asserting a right for less than 250 acre-feet of water per year, which in the scheme of things is a fairly modest claim. So there are only about 2,450 claimants who are asking for more than 250 acre-feet of water per year. Most of those smaller claimants, the 92%, are looking for domestic water, irrigation of a property, stock pond water, modest claims. It's in the Little Colorado adjudication, it's 97% of claimants falling into that modest claimant category. In fact, there are only 186 claimants looking for more than 250 acre-feet of water per year. So, little guys and gals. So why have the adjudications taken so long? So this is why the adjudications have taken so long. To begin with, there were really big jurisdictional questions about who the Arizona State Court could haul in to fight about water rights. And initially, and I should have mentioned that in addition to all the little guys and gals, we have federal claimants in the forms of tribes, national parks, the Bureau of Land Management, federal land managers, U.S. Forest. We also have state lands as a claimant. We have mines. We have big businesses, ranchers. We have cities. We have towns. Everybody can be part of this exciting adjudication. But initially, there was a lot of dispute over whether a state court would be qualified to hear the federal claims. And we had years and years of litigation that eventually concluded, yes, the state court can, as long as it is appropriately responding and being funding the DWR as the technical advisor. Then we had years of litigation over the very basic ground rules. These are cases that are called the Gila, the series of Gila decisions. They were really over two topics. One was how to deal with federal claims and mostly tribal claims, how to quantify them, how to deal with them. It was one big topic. And the other big topic was over this issue of subflow. So Gila 2 and 4 address the issue of subflow. So the subflow issue winds up being one of the most pernicious issues in the adjudications. And there's a reason for that. And that is because while we have the doctrine of prior appropriation for surface water claims, we have a separate doctrine, as most of you know, maybe all of you know, for groundwater. We have the doctrine of beneficial use, which means that if you own the land, you can drill a well, and you can use that water as long as you're not wasting it. Now, these two rules work well in a place that has a lot of water. They don't work so well where there's not a lot of water, like Arizona. And so in Gila 4, the Arizona Supreme Court said that water that would otherwise reach the riverbed is subflow, and it's treated as surface water, not groundwater. So that's the subflow ruling. And they said in Gila 4, this is important because water is a very precious and limited commodity in Arizona, and much turns on how subflow is determined. So the court tried to use its best geohydrological sensibilities in coming up with a rule for subflow. And this wonderful graphic tells you that the rule they came up with really almost begs more questions. So as you can see, the court said that water that would reach the riverbed, and they have termed it the saturated floodplain Holocene alluvium. In other words, the alluvial layer under rivers and streams that was laid down in modern times, that layer, when it is saturated with subflow. So water in that subflow zone is surface water for the purposes of Arizona's Arizona law. But if you can look at A, B, C, and D. These are wells on this graphic. You can see all the questions that come up when you start trying to figure out the subflow issue. Well A is drawing water from the saturated subplain Holocene alluvium. That water is surface water. Well B, some of that water is coming from below the saturated subplain Holocene alluvium. And so there's a question. How much of that water is subflow? How much of it is actually on the bottom groundwater? Well C it's close to a river, and this graphic's trying to show that it is pulling water that would otherwise go into the saturated subplain Holocene alluvium, and so it's technically in the cone of depression. And the Arizona court said when wells are pulling water into a cone of depression away from the subflow zone, then those wells also need to get in line in the adjudication as if they were taking surface water. And then well D is its own little discrete well that does not seem to be drawing water at all from the river or subflow zone. So well D is safe. That's probably more than you need, but it just goes to show how complex the subflow issue has been, and it has taken a long time, and it is ongoing for the parties to not only recognize these questions, but also to fight them out. And so in 2013, Judge Brine, who is the presiding judge in the adjudication, sort of made this big statement that the court's perception is that the law surrounding subflow has proven to be the root cause of delay in the adjudication. So we have jurisdictional fights, we have fights over ground rules, and then we have the hard work of the court, the parties, and the Department of Water Resources in figuring out these very difficult issues of subflow. But that doesn't mean work hasn't gone on. You can see here that starting in 2002, the Department of Water Resources, the technical expert on the adjudication, started its work by going to the court and saying, this is how we are going to determine the subflow zone, and this is a process in which the parties get to have a say, have objections. It's been ongoing. You can see what happened. Finally, in 2017, 15 years later, the court affirmed the delineation of the subflow zone in the San Pedro, the first basin to be addressed in the Gila adjudication. There is a sense by many parties that now that those issues have been decided, and because a lot of the technical issues either are soon will be or have been decided, the fights won't be quite so difficult in the other basins in the adjudication. So all this work is great legal work in a sense. I mean, there's much more clarity legally. The problem is that the problem has gotten worse during this time. So this is a map that's based on the ADWR's Wells 55 database. The Wells 55 database, as I'm sure you all know, is not an exact count of wells, but it's a very good proxy for what's gone on for well development. This is the San Pedro. You can see that in 1987, when the subflow issue was first raised, there were about 3,600 wells. We'll just fly through this. In 1995, about 1,500 more wells. In 2000, this is when Gila 4 was decided, almost twice as many wells. So wells continued to be drilled, even though there was an issue legally about what is the water that's being removed. 2005, almost 7,600 wells, and in 2012, 8,500 wells. In 2017, almost 8,800 wells. So there's been a lot of well development. And who are these people drilling wells? They're innocent. Many of them are just people who bought a property. And under state law, they did what they were supposed to do. They filed an intent to drill notice with the department. They paid thousands of dollars to drill their well. And they probably got a statement back from the department that said, when they filed their completion of drilling, that said, okay, we know that. Be aware, there's this adjudication. You may not have a right to the water in the well. And not all of the wells, of course, here are in the subflow zone, but some of the wells are. And some of the wells are in the cone of depression, and we're talking about the San Pedro River here. So why is it important to resolve the adjudications? To my mind, it's important, first of all, because of those little guys and gals. It isn't a good thing in Arizona to have that kind of mismanagement or uncertainty around water. And the other thing is there are communities that would like to do good water management, good water planning, and they can't secure their water until the adjudication is resolved. They can't have certainty about what water they have to manage until the adjudication is resolved. So as Richard said, in the report, the long-term water augmentation report, the subcommittee recognized that the adjudication is a critical barrier to augmentation in many parts of the state. And we weren't the first group to recognize this. In DWR's strategic vision in 2014, the department identified the adjudication as a top priority because until we resolve claims in the adjudication, it is very difficult to identify the strategies needed for cities to have water resilience and water certainties. What are the, and we can just run through this. I showed this San Pedro and I thought, I want to sort of put a point on this by showing you the Verde Basin too. This is the Verde Basin in 1974, 2,300 wells, 1988, almost 7,500 wells, 2000 when the Gila River, 88 is about the time the subflow issue was raised. When the Gila 4 decision was issued, the Verde had over 13,000 wells, and then today, almost 18,000 wells. Now, not all of those wells are in the subflow zone or in the cone of depression, but a lot of them will be found to be. And all of those wells that were drilled recently will have very junior rights. There were, in both of those basins and in other parts of Arizona, where there was water, you can count on having big senior water rights holders and a lot of small senior water rights holders who were there way before the adjudication started. So that means that those well owners face having their wells shut down by the court, and that's a very serious problem. So implications, water uncertainty, and delay makes the law more clear because we're fighting it out, but it makes the problem worse for the water users. So what can the Kyle Center possibly do to help with this? What we did before I even got there was pull together a group of party representatives, mostly lawyers representing parties in the adjudication, but also some water experts who are very familiar. And I want to take the moment to thank all of those in here who've been part of our adjudication reform discussions. A lot of what the committee has done is talked through ideas and then decided that they probably weren't ideas that Arizona was ready for. One thing that we did that was pretty concrete was to spend a couple years developing a proposed order that would allow state law claimants to settle claims once and for all. So this is another really difficult aspect of the adjudication. Just imagine if you're going to go do a permanent settlement that the court affirms, the court needs to make sure that the other parties aren't going to be impaired by the settlement. We have a procedure for federal claims, which we needed so that we could settle some of the big tribal and other big federal claims. We do not have a procedure currently that enables a state law claimant to settle his or her claims and get out of court. We have a proposed order right now that we hope, the Kyle Center facilitated a discussion. Some of the parties took it to the court, and we're awaiting a decision. I'll skip to the bottom. At some point, we pulled together, with the urging of members of the adjudication subcommittee, we pulled together a group of water managers, no lawyers, except staff, and had them conceptualize how could you resolve claims in the adjudication. We developed a report about it, which we shared with our adjudication committee and a few others. I'd be very happy to share it with you all. Anyway, just email me if you'd like to see it. And then we've had really extensive discussions of concepts for settling the subflow disputes those discussions almost always go to the basin scale. And here are the key concepts that come out of those discussions. First, inevitably, when you're talking about, you can see this problem, inevitably you think about how do we protect current well owners but stop more development, because we're talking about well owners now who will inevitably be found not to have a right to pump some of their water. So how do you protect them but get a grip on well development? That's a concept that always comes out. It's always we would somehow grandfather those well owners and limit the development of new wells. With that, there's always a discussion of having those well rights be transferable, something like what has happened in AMAs, that you could take that if you decided you didn't need your well, that you could sell it to someone else. These are just concepts. We've talked about options for mitigation. One kind of option for mitigation would be that a person who's going to pump water out could pay a surface water user to leave water in the river commensurate with the amount of subflow they were taking out. That's one example of mitigation. And there are pilot programs that are kind of demonstrating proof of concept taking place in the Verde right now. Another option that we have discussed are some kind of an escrow program where you could if you had a surface water right or a senior right, you could put it into an escrow sort of scheme, and another water user, a well user or subflow user could essentially buy that water or do a sort of exchange through some kind of escrow agency. Those are the work that we've done so far. I have to say I feel like we probably can't come up with any other concepts at this point, but I'm always open to new ideas. We've had about 4 years of discussing these concepts, and I think it's been a very thorough discussion. And it really isn't, they're out there. There are examples from other states that are very interesting, but that's, we feel like we've gone as far as we can. At the same time, we've engaged in more public-related work about the adjudication. We published last year the report, The Price of Uncertainty. I have extra copies that I would love to pass out to you all. This really is looking at how the adjudication stands to impair economic development in many areas, many adjudication areas. And it also, what really came through to me in developing this report is that communities, I don't think there's a community in Arizona that doesn't want to do good water management. And what came out for me is how the adjudication really impedes local communities from doing water management in the way that they desire to. The adjudication needs to be resolved so that they know what is the water supply that they have to manage. We are working on another report, which we hope will be out within a month or so, called Investing in Certainty. And this is discussing this point that I started out with, that we're turning a corner in the adjudication. We have the big jurisdictional issues decided. We have the ground rules decided. We only have a handful of big, broad issues to be decided, and most of those are currently under advisement with the court. And we only have one special master right now. She doesn't even have a paralegal. We have a really great Department of Water Resources team, but with twice as many people, we could be doing twice as much work. So investing in certainty is going to make the case that for a very modest investment, Arizona could be getting the adjudication resolved faster. And then finally, we are doing a lot of ongoing outreach, more in the Verde, particularly in the Verde, to help people understand what the adjudication is really about. So my closing thoughts. At this point, having lived with the adjudication as an outsider, I think that the biggest impediment to resolving the adjudication is a lack of understanding of what it's about. It seems complex, but it really isn't that complex when you start to, with a little bit of knowledge. And there are people all over the state who would like to get out of it, who ask, how do we get out of this? They ask their lawyers, they ask me, I'm sure they ask their elected officials, and the answer they get is, you can't. And that's not really true. There are ways. Our group has worked on concepts that could enable people to find a way out. The special master has done amazing work identifying claims that are not very controversial. The least controversial would be a really old, a surface water user who has a really, really senior right. And so the special master has been identifying bundles of those kinds of claims, and then calling the big parties in, the big guys, to come in, often at DWR, and basically agree to recognize those very senior small claims. But one person, one special master working on her own can only do, we'd be lucky if we had 200 claims settled a year. And we have 50,000 claims in this adjudication. So it's really not feasible for one individual to get this done. At a minimum, she needs a couple of paralegals who can do that work so that she can do some other work. The other, my other closing thought is delay isn't helping anyone. When I first started this, I thought, well, maybe the people who might be pumping subflow have an interest in delay, but they don't. It isn't helpful to anyone to drag this out, especially as communities start looking at financing for augmentation. And they can't get a bond. They won't be able to get a bond because they won't have a certified water right. So that we can look at the opposite example. Look at the city of Payson. Payson resolved its water claims and made a deal with SRP to develop the Cragen Reservoir. Payson has a high degree of water security because they resolved their claims. And then finally, I think that the time has come for Arizona to make a greater investment in the adjudication, and both in the court and in the Department of Water Resources. This will help Arizona to get to a much better place of water certainty. I'm happy to take any questions and would welcome you all to get in touch with me. Yes, Senator.
Thank you, Sarah. So just 2 points. First of all, do you think it would be beneficial to put a moratorium on any new wells in some of these areas until the Gila River stream adjudication has been finalized? I feel for the individuals that are purchasing land and drilling holes that may not have access to water.
I think I wouldn't speak to a moratorium, but I do think that it's probably very surprising to landowners not to learn about the adjudication until they've drilled their well. So just better consumer awareness, consumer alerts would be a good thing. Just so that, the New York Times had an article about a family that moved someplace and there was no water in the well, and that probably wasn't even an adjudication issue, but those kinds of things are not good optics for the state.
My second question is last year during session, we had discussions and actually tried to get one more judge and 2 more paralegals into the budget. Do you feel that it would be better to, what positions do you feel would be necessary? I mean, we've got several legislators here right now, and so perhaps some suggestions?
Our report will really detail that, but there's no question that a real estate-oriented paralegal or 2 would make a huge difference for the court right now in terms of simply this work, which is very time-consuming to identify claims and help these people get out. That would be really a worthwhile investment. I think that ADWR we're at a point now where, and I should have said this, the court asks the department to develop a hydrographic survey report of each basin, and that is basically a catalog of all the water users, the subflow zone, and it's a very time-consuming, huge task. There isn't really a reason why we couldn't be doing more HSRs. We held off doing those because of all of these big foundational issues that had to be resolved. But we're at the point now where the Department of Water Resources, which has made lots of progress on the Verde HSR, could be completing it and moving to the other basins. So I think more DWR staff. And the other thing is that technology has really changed since 2002. So DWR can do a lot of this using probably Google Earth or other GIS tools, and we can probably get through HSRs faster, but we need to have the manpower to get it done. So both of those things are really important at this point. Possibly another adjudication judge, or the presiding judge is a part-time judge. He has a calendar in criminal or civil
criminal.
And so
court cases about 60% to 80% of his time.
And we wait. Honestly, it takes if you're a criminal judge, you have a time deadline for your decisions. People aren't allowed to languish before they're found guilty or not guilty. And so I think that may be one of the reasons why sometimes the decisions in the adjudication take a very long time. I mean, it can be a year or longer before a decision comes down. So at least more time from the judge, definitely some paralegals, probably another adjudication judge, more manpower at DWR so that we could get the other HSRs going.
Well, just one last comment, and I hope to see those in the governor's budget. Makes it easier.
Beth, you have your hand raised to make a comment.
There's very good reasons why the adjudication was delayed, and most of the people in this room and their attorneys were encouraging that delay, and that was to give time. And actually, several U.S. senators for the state of Arizona was encouraging that delay to give those claimants time to negotiate these very large federal claims that were made. SRP, the city of Phoenix. So it was only until that was settled that now others want to push for a rapid move forward. And we are hanging out people in Northeast Arizona for a meat grinder because we are not providing them the time or that to do the settlement. They worked, Senator Kyle worked 17 years. That deal got rejected, but still, the claims that are made, and some of those federal claims are 2, 3, 4 times the amount of
they're
water.
for more than all the water in that basin. That's correct. But I have to say that, as a lawyer, I certainly wouldn't assert a modest claim. If I were representing any party, I'd ask for much more water than, I'd ask for the most water I could.
Right. But my last point is, two. One is that if certainty is pounding the nails in the 13th step to the gallows, it's certain, but it's sure not comfortable. And then the last thing is you talked about the wells and you said that they have junior rights.
Not all wells.
None of those wells have junior rights of surface water. That there's no legal or statutory process for a groundwater well, person that applied and notice of intent to drill, to have a surface water.
That's not actually the case. In the adjudication, wells there are already instances in these claims that are settled where well owners are basically having their wells treated as if it's a surface water diversion. An example might be a property owner who was diverting water and then it became more convenient to dig a well, like to have a stock pond. And so they have settled their claims. They're not official settlements because they're waiting for the adjudication to end, but with the parties that would be contesting it, where the parties are saying, you had this very senior water right, you've essentially changed the point of diversion by digging a well. And the Gila 4 recognizes subflow as surface water. If you moved in 1920 and you dug a well, or 1908, and you dug a well next to the river, that would be regarded under Gila 4 as a surface water right. So it's not like we're going to wipe all the old well users out. They are treated as surface water users under Gila 4.
That's the case for someone who had a surface water right that's now changing their diversion
even
to
a well. Even a well.
Can I speak? Okay. Many and most of those wells, there's not a statutory process for a single one of them to file for a surface water claim for their groundwater domestic well. So that's my point,
right.
is that if we want to somewhat address that in some way, that is something
and I think
we should look at.
It's a great point.
But most of them, we talk about this like either or. Some of those wells are pumping 0.0001 of surface water. Some are pumping 22% of surface water. So it's not a cut and dry,
right.
your surface, your ground. It's a
And that's actually one of the last big foundational issues to be decided about how do you decide, if you remember that graphic, if a well is taking some surface water, some groundwater, how does the court deal with that? That is a very good point. It's yet to be decided. And I think your point that we need to look at how can a person who's withdrawing essentially surface water through a well perfect their right. It's an issue out there. But under HELA 4, it's not that you're just wiped out if you have a well that's pumping subflow. It has yet to be decided.
That could be decided.
So not to cut off discussion, so I think this was partly to tee up whether or not this council believes that it has a role in looking at adjudication reform. We had postponed that discussion, I would say, until we heard this presentation. And I'd like to spend a couple of minutes, we're already substantially behind schedule, to hear folks' thoughts if they have any on that issue. Should this council get involved in adjudication reform? Senator Rotondo.
Thank you. I think we have to. I think we simply have to. As Bass was saying, many things had to be done, and that's true. But I can't see not discussing this and bringing it to the forefront because it has to be done, and we're looking at water security here. We have to know who has what and how much they have. I just my opinion.
Bass.
I believe that one thing this council could do is encourage and provide, however we do that, whatever methods we can do to encourage those large federal claimants to settle these claims in those areas and whatever form that might take. There might be, a carrot and there may be a stick, but what we're hanging out in some communities in this state to those huge federal claims could be very devastating.
So let me propose that at the next council meeting we'll have more discussion. DWR will, at the very least, given your comment, Bass, talk about what the current federal policy is on settlement of tribal claims, and there's some new challenges that have not existed in the past. And I think they're important to throw that into the conversation, and then we can talk more about what we can do to encourage the settlement of those claims. Because I agree with you, and again, it's always been a priority for the state for many years, through many different administrations, to settle those claims rather than have them proceed through the litigation pathway.
Director Bushatsky, we've looked into what's going on, and our committee has thought about different approaches, so we'd be happy to send you some information about that.
Thank you. So moving on, I'm going to table the presentation on Safe Yield and do an abbreviated presentation on item 6, and I just want to tee it up by saying we gave a presentation to the council about DWR's process to move forward the 4th and 5th management plan. We started the process on the 4th management plan, and we want to share some of the feedback that we've gotten through that process with you, and I'm really asking you to be a sounding board a little bit in terms of a couple of different paths forward that are potentially in front of us, DWR, us, in terms of the 4th management plan. So 5 to 10 minutes at most, and then we'll be out of here.
Excuse me, Director.
Yes.
May I just make one comment to the prior? Perhaps if we don't move forward on some of the other aspects that we were just talking about, perhaps we could at least weigh in on funding for the adjudication.
So Natalie Mass will do the abbreviated presentation, and we'll get to it.
Good morning. My name is Natalie Mast. I am the program manager for the management plans here at ADWR. Like Director Bushatsky said, I'm going to be as brief as I can here, so we've skipped a little bit of background here. I would just like to point out, since we skipped that Safe Field presentation, that we are, under the management plans work group, we have created a Safe Field technical subgroup. Our first meeting of that group will be on September 23rd in the same room at 1 p.m. And we do have webinar available for that meeting. You can ask to be added to our mailing list by emailing managementplans@azwater.gov for more information about the management plan work group in those meetings. So what I'll give a quick overview of today is we have laid out this estimated timeline for the management plans, for both the fourth management plans and for the fifth management plans. ADWR has a goal of adopting the remaining fourth management plans in the next 2 years. So starting with Phoenix, then Pinal, then the Santa Cruz AMA. And while concurrently starting the kind of research and stakeholder outreach process for the fifth management plans through the management plans work group. So we started this fourth management plans process, which is what I'll focus on today in the few minutes we have left. We started this fourth management plans process with the presentation of the draft Phoenix AMA fourth management plan to the Phoenix GUAC, Groundwater Users Advisory Council, in July, and we have received a very broad range of comments on that plan, with many comments expressing support for various aspects of the plan or for components of the plan, and others expressing concern regarding some of those changes. In several instances, we are working, continuing to work with various stakeholders to make some practical changes and refinements to that draft plan. And the written comments we have received are now posted on our website with a slightly updated draft, largely minor technical and data type corrections. So we believe that these two processes for the fourth and fifth management plans are a good structure for moving forward with the fourth plans, making incremental small steps in the fourth management plans, and moving forward into making larger steps in the fifth management plans. But we have received several comments expressing concern for the pace with adopting these remaining fourth management plans and expressing a need for additional stakeholder feedback regarding the changes to those plans. So today we would like some feedback. We are working hard to be responsive to the comments that we've received, and we have two paths forward here. The first and recommended option is a response to this concern regarding process and time for feedback on the recommended changes to the fourth management plans. And this would allow additional time and space for further stakeholder consideration of the Phoenix draft fourth management plan. This would consist of an additional public meeting tentatively scheduled for October 3rd and an extended opportunity for input via email or through meetings through November 8th. ADWR would then publish an update to the draft with the intent to start promulgation of that Phoenix fourth management plan in January. This timeline would allow ADWR to further incorporate this stakeholder feedback into the draft Phoenix fourth management plan. And due to timelines for the conservation program effective dates, starting promulgation in January would not actually impact the final effective date of the conservation programs under that plan. Option B here is a status quo option, putting off these incremental changes until the fifth management plans. This option would not speed things up as compared with option A, as it would require some time for ADWR staff to make the needed edits to the regulatory portions of the draft. So this option would also have a target start date for the promulgation in January. We did also discuss these options at the Phoenix GUAC on Tuesday, and that council expressed support for going with option A.
So let me just add one thing. To seek a little clarification, if we do option A for the Phoenix fourth management plan, we end up with about 2 years of additional conservation requirements that are enforceable before we could get the fifth management plans promulgated. So for the other two AMAs, it's less than 2 years. So that's kind of the conundrum here is, do we just carry forward the conservation programs from the third management plan? They're in effect now. They're enforceable now. Or do we have this accelerated, in either case, even with option A, it's still an accelerated time period, and stakeholders are raising concerns about not vetting these changes throughout these time periods. So is it worth making those changes for those couple of extra years or less than the other AMAs, or is it better to go forth and go through our fifth management plan process, which does follow the traditional path of having a very robust set of committees for all the stakeholders to have months and months and maybe even years and years of input into the process. And that's what we're struggling with, and that's the feedback I'm looking for from this group. So anybody like to weigh in? It's a lot to throw in a short period of time. And I'll remind folks that in the Auditor General's audit of DWR in preparation for sunset review, their biggest concern, I would say, was the lack of promulgation on time for the fourth management plans, which is why we put together this accelerated package, honestly. Jamie.
Thank you, Director. Knowing that I'm not involved, Mojave County is not a part of the AMA, I think Arizona, DWR, and the water policy advisors have demonstrated they can perform under pressure because they did DCP. And perhaps it takes the pressure from the deadline to get it through. I think you should go forward with option A. I think there are benefits to be gained from the additional information and the change in, or possible changes in the methods used.
Others? Senator Otondo.
Thank you, Director. So I've been attending the management plan meetings, and first of all, I just want to congratulate your staff. They're doing a great job. I think it's really important to have the input of the stakeholders, and I think it's important that since we have the momentum from DCP, as mentioned, we should continue to move forward, and I am in full support of option A.
Philip.
I'll keep this brief, but I would also support option A.
Anyone else? Cheryl?
I, too, have been trying to attend those management plan meetings. It's obviously an important thing for Valley Partnership. I do agree that we do need further stakeholder input. I think that's an important balance. I appreciate the time frame, but I just think we need that more time, so I support option A.
Thank you. Anyone else? Ron.
Mr. Chairman, speaking for some of our NAMWA members that are in the Prescott AMA, I think that we would support option A as well.
Bass.
I know this will surprise you. I support option B. I've been to some of those meetings working with the parties that have to, on the agriculture side, that will have to come up with that stuff. I think that, DCP took you 2-3 years. Now everybody was, it was crunched 9 months, 12 months, whatever. But the fifth plan should be the one coming, 2020, right? And so I think we should be spending more time on that plan than the fourth one, which, will have about 13 seconds to be deployed.
Other comments? Terry Sue.
I have a question, actually. If you chose option B, what would the consequences be? I know you talked about the GAO report. What would the actual consequences be of just sticking with the third management plan?
So the consequences would be that third management plan conservation requirements that are less stringent than those we have rolled out for the fourth management plan will be in effect until the fifth management plan is promulgated. And at that point, those more stringent and perhaps even further stringent conservation requirements would become effective. And I can't tell you how much water that would save at this point. I don't know if we have that estimate, no. But those are the consequences. And I'll say this again, it's without being able to quantify that consequence, something we talked about in DCP discussions was drier future, the optics of not doing TCP, the impact on the view of businesses and investment in Arizona about not taking care of business. Those are some of the consequences, perhaps, that will flow from this decision. Others? Stephanie.
So just some clarification. So how is the decision going to be made? Which option to go with? Is it like consensus? Is it this council? Is it the committee that's working on it? And are we just talking about the Phoenix AMA?
So first, by nature, it would impact the two other AMAs, which are?
Pinal and Santa Cruz AMA.
Okay. And so I'm looking for feedback from all of you. We're seeking feedback, as Natalie describes, from the Groundwater User Advisory Council, but the final decision is going to be mine. Anyone else? Brett.
Me again. Brett Fleck for AMWA. AMWA has consulted with its members, and we support continuing to work through the proposed fourth management plan and updating the conservation programs. AMWA has always supported the Groundwater Management Act, including the management plans, and the purpose of those plans, at least for the Phoenix AMA, is to incrementally bring us closer to safe yield through more stringent requirements. By continuing with this draft, we're sending a message to future residents, to the business community, like Tom said, and really to ourselves that Arizona is committed to getting to long-term sustainability for groundwater use in the AMAs. We support that.
So before you go, Bess, I want to say one thing. I'm well aware a lot of the concerns on the speed of the process have come from the agricultural community, but not solely. I'm not sure there's anybody here from the golf course industry on this council, but they have expressed strong concerns as well about the process and about the increased requirements in their industry. We haven't heard as much from the municipalities. We heard what Brett just said. But just so everyone understands the dynamics of what we've heard from our stakeholders in the process so far. So go ahead, Bass.
The other dynamic that at least I have heard and concerned about, at least from one of the GUACs, is that they have done a lot of work on this. They actually submitted one, and it's just still hanging out there, and that somehow we are just going to supersede their process on one that they worked for a long time, that we've drug our feet on for a long time. And now that, I think that could best be remedied by us diving into the fifth, bringing the GUACs in with that, and then they won't have this feeling like it doesn't matter what we do, they just ignore us. And so I just offer that.
Thank you. Anyone else? So to ask, Stephanie again.
I'm just wanted to make the comment that that I would concur with Bass in the fact that we need more stakeholder input, and I'm not sure if just rushing just because we need a 4 in sequential order, if that makes sense, not to focus more on 5 and take the time that needs to be taken.
So I appreciate everyone's comments. If anybody would like to comment to me, additionally, you all know where I live and have my email address or my phone number, because I'll be chewing on this a little bit over the next few days before I decide what to do. But I do appreciate everybody staying late to talk with us about this, and I appreciate the input. Thank you all. So with that, we're a little bit behind. Next meeting is December 3rd. And then followed by a March 11th meeting. And we'll work on an agenda for that next meeting. And I thank everybody for your participation, comments, and debate today. Thank you all.
They've laid out.
They've already got it.
I think they're delayed there. That's am I right? It would delay 5 if we're delaying 4.
I think if we go to 4, we're delaying 5.
I was. No, I heard you. I was thinking about it. But I will tell you.
But they have